Tēnā koutou e namaste Aotearoa, and welcome to the BYC Podcast, coming to you from the Export Beer Garden studio in the midst of a week dominated by Indian wins, Indians, Indian flags, and Indian palpable relief. This week, we reflect on the T20 World Cup denouement and what it all really means. We gloss over two annihilations of the White Ferns. We dig into some correspondence from our legendary listeners and wash it all down with some cricket violence juice from Pakistan. I'm Paul Ford, godfather of the Beige Brigade. I'm joined by master of the New Zealand cricket scoop, Dylan Cleaver, el presidente of the Substack sports newsletter, unmissable writing in there. The Bounce, absolute belter of a newsletter, highly recommend, and I pay for it. DC, did you bust out your green, orange, and white face paint and body paint this week?
I didn't actually, and it was a really niggly time to watch it. And I've got a confession. I did watch the match in full, but unfortunately, I already knew the result before I watched the end of it. But I still found myself weirdly excited because I didn't realize the permutations that got us to that Indian victory, and really how I think we'll address this a little bit later, but how South Africa were knocking on the door of history and it was unlocked, yet they couldn't find a way through.
Yes, for the three people in the whole cricketing universe that don't know what happened, of course, India 176 for 7 off their 20 overs. The Rat, Virat Kohli, finding some form, 76 off 59 balls. And the miracle man, Akshar Patel, with 47 off 31. Anrik Nortje and Keshav Maharaj, the pick of the bowlers. And then the South African chase, which looked so bad, then so good, and then ultimately failed. 169 for 8 off their 20 overs. Massive innings from Heinrich Klaasen, the basher. Quinton de Kock was superb. David Miller did some good things. And it was Hardik Pandya with the most wickets, but it was Jasprit Bumrah, that man, that miracle man again, who was a real factor in that final. Dylan, I thought it was an excellent final, actually. Played on one of the best pitches in the tournament, and definitely between the two best teams. Of course, they both went into the match unbeaten, having won 8 matches in a row. There were some foibles and some bullshit in the format. You know, there was some shenanigans, I think, around how it all came together. But we can't really argue with what the final that was produced.
I thought it was excellent. You had two teams that are clearly committed to the T20, and you can see that by their domestic competitions, which they're throwing a lot of money, a lot of resource, a lot of time at. Two best teams at the tournament, a traditional cricket venue in a town or a city that breathes cricket and has just such great lineage of world-class players, possibly the greatest of them all, and Gary Sobers. And so everything about it felt right. It was just a really good game of cricket. Virat Kohli in his last T20I, goes out a winner, goes out with some class. I didn't actually realise. Did you realise what a drought it had been for India at ICC tournaments? I just kind of assumed that they win these kind of things all the time, but it had actually got to a point where there was some real anxiety on the subcontinent.
Yeah, well, expected to win, I think, is probably, there's just so much overwhelming coverage about them, particularly when these tournaments roll around, right? But I think it's a 13-year drought, isn't it? They've lost, most recently, the 50-over final at home, where literally the entire Indian state expected them to win. Of course, multiple World Test Championship finals. They're always, they're a sensational team, but as you say, that the pressure continued to build, and certainly over the last 13 years, they had not managed to deliver.
Yeah, 2011 World Cup, I think, was the last one. And, there was certainly a lot of fretting going along. As you mentioned that South Africa started poorly, but let's be honest here, they got themselves into a position 151 for 4 after 16 overs. That is a doddle. 26 of 24 with 2 set players, not just 2 set players, but Klaasen and Miller, who are T20 gods with the bat. How did they lose from there?
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously it would be very easy to just say they choked, but when you're watching the game, you did always feel, because it was real, that the joker in the pack was still those 2 overs that Bumrah had up his sleeve, and you knew that if he could come out and wreak some havoc, that South African tail, even sort of that lower order, good players, but it did feel like some of those guys are batting maybe a little bit higher than you'd ideally want them to do. Really kind of South Africa very reliant on their top 5, really. And after that, with Maharaj and Jansen coming in, it did feel like they were, you didn't want to see them just quite that early, to be honest. And so, look, I'm reluctant to call it a choke. I think it was just a Bumrahing, actually. And, as you say, they were in trouble early, and they were actually in trouble sort of reasonably late as well. It was really that knock from Klaasen, that 27 ball 52. But yes, you did think as well, 26 off 24. They should be okay. A very well-timed injury break. I'm not reading anything into it. It was literally just a momentum breaker from Richard Punt. And then when they came back, Klaasen, of course, just gave his wicket away. You can't criticise him, though. He's blazing at everything. Very unlikely that he was going to come out and just knock it around 1s and 2s, which is kind of what that's all the situation needed, frustratingly.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, Bumrah bowled that 17th over, and I'm sitting there watching it, admittedly already knowing the result, saying, just get your 6 singles. You can do all the damage at the other end. Instead, as you mentioned, Klaas gave his wicket away. You're dead right. Marco Jansen batting at least one position too high at number 7 comes out and tries to block, tries to play a traditional cricket forward defence and gets his poles knocked. And from that moment on, you could feel the tremors in the South African dugout. And I just I didn't have the feeling, I knew it. I knew they were going to fall short, but you could almost sense that hope fading away. Each person that came to the wicket was a little less confident than the last one, and in the end, the best team won. And in some ways, it was hard to gauge that early in this tournament because some of the conditions they played on it was such a lottery, because the format possibly needs to be ironed out ahead of the next one. But in the end, I think the best team won, and we're waving goodbye to a few T20 legends after this World Cup, like Kane Williamson, Ravi Jadeja, who was just a non-factor for India in this tournament, Rohit Sharma, and Virat Kohli, who had a dreadful tournament until when it really, really mattered most.
That's right. What did he? I think 75. He had 75 runs in the tournament. So that's across 8 games. I can't remember if he batted 8 times, but let's just say roughly. And then scored 76 in the final. And he was superb and went through the gears. I did love, of course, there was lots of talk, and we've touched on this, about the joy and the palpable relief and also the redemption arc of India. And I saw a couple of reporters sort of pretty obvious to acknowledge a redemption song by Bob Marley, of course, in Bob Marley country over there. But, I'm not quite sure that it's probably drawing quite a long bow to say that this Cricket World Cup was the story about a team that had been abducted into slavery, fighting for their physical and mental freedom. I just feel like that might be a little bit kind of gilding the lily.
Look, and they didn't play in Jamaica either, which is actually Bob Marley's hometown.
Totally. Good luck if you were traveling from anywhere trying to get to that game. Apparently, it was absolutely apocalyptic if you were a journalist who was not part of the TV commentary crew, if you were a person who was not a player or an umpire. Apparently just an absolutely ridiculous situation where you travelled for 10 hours in what is a direct 1-hour flight from a couple of the semi-final venues. So, I know the English media were absolutely raging. Not that they were there, so they didn't need to worry too much. You mentioned DC, the delivery to Marco Jansen, and there was another sensational delivery to Rita Hendricks, who had a pretty difficult tournament, felt like a bit of a walking wicket, and Bumrah used up one of his best deliveries on castling him. I saw Cricket Info call Bumrah, and I really related to this when I was watching those the sort of last chapter of that game. They said Bumrah is like he is like the phone a friend and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He's like your lifeline. You know he's going to do something, and it's just a matter of when you're going to play that card. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary position for a player to be in.
Yeah, I mean, he is that good, isn't he? I actually might have assigned one of those previous wickets to him incorrectly. Pandya was also pretty good at the end as well. And he'd been the kind of fragile link in that Indian bowling lineup up till then as well. He was kind of the one that opposition have targeted, but Bumrah really is that good. And of course, we can't leave this final without touching on what was either a sensational boundary catch and emblematic of where the modern game has got to in terms of outfielding, or a little bit controversial. Where do you stand on this, Paul? Do you stand on the boundary rope, or do you stand just inside it?
Well, I feel like I'm arguing with the Almighty on this one, because I saw that Surya Kumar Yadav said that it was God's plan for him to take that catch. So I waited. I do go into this discussion with some trepidation. But look, his dancing feet in the deep, they've talked about taking one of the most important catches in Indian cricket history. Look, it was that. Where did I sit on it? I'm happy with it, to be honest. I think I've got the rule book out. The playing conditions for this tournament said that it's the cushion, not a white line, which is the boundary. Literally, section 19.3 says, if a solid object used to mark the boundary is disturbed for any reason, then the boundary shall be considered to be in its original position. So, look, I don't think that he touched the Toblerone. Yes, no. His foot was over the sort of pre-marked white line. I understand that it was to do with where the pitch was, and it was there the whole game. And I don't know, did a South African player, did Heinrich Nortje, when he thundered into the fence early on in the match, did he move it and it didn't get moved back into place? I'm not sure, but either way, look, I think I like the controversy, because I think it's just part of the game, and it's great that there's these stories and narratives, and there's some great little AI videos that make it look more dubious and so on. But from my point of view, fair and square, I thought it was a beauty. And, my heart went out to David Miller, actually. I've got a lot of time for him. And, well, where did you find on it? Was it God's plan?
Yeah, I don't know if it was God's plan. I don't know if we should bring Vishnu or Shiva, or I'm not sure which one governs boundary catches.
Jay Shah, perhaps.
But I always, like, every time we get something like that now, my mind immediately casts back to Lord's 2019 and Trent Bolt. And again, it was just my immediate thought, and I tried to banish it. I was trying to get out, damn thought, get out, but I couldn't. I'm just thinking, throw it into Capital. But no, I think it was fine. Yeah. It would be really weird to try and explain it to an American who might have just been into this, getting into cricket and watching this tournament, if that had been ruled not out because his foot clipped the freestanding white line, when for all intents and purposes, the Toblerone is the boundary.
Yeah, I think I think maybe there's different playing conditions, and sometimes it is the line and etc. But yeah, look, it just seemed fair and square. It was also one of those moments in the game where you go, that is a screamer of a catch. If the match turns on that, fair enough, actually. Yeah. And I know, of course, David Miller was not sitting in the dugout. He certainly did not start returning to the dugout till he'd watched it about 100 times, and then dragged his bat and dragged his sorry ass back to the South African dugout. And as I say, I did feel really sorry for him. He's one of those guys I've followed. I think I've talked about it before. He wasn't playing, or we ended up having a couple of drinks at a bar at Mount Maunganui. Just not just me and him. There's a whole bunch of people, and he was a real good bugger. He told some great yarns about Daniel Vittori and Jesse Ryder and IPL times and all that kind of stuff. He's 35 years old. Of course, famously has never played Test cricket. Retired from first-class cricket in 2018. He's played 298 international matches and 0 Test matches, despite having an average of 36 and 6 tons in first-class cricket. It's just, yeah. I mean, an archetypal, just, if you were making a T20 cricketer, he is the kind of guy that you play as an incredible fielder. I don't know if he bowls. I'm sure he probably does. And,
he does.
Famous quote, which was from his old man, and he's been playing cricket like this his whole life. If it's in the arc, it's out the park. If it's in the V, it's in the tree. And I just think, if our dads had given us that kind of advice, we would be probably much better cricketers than what we were trying to do out there, DC, noodling it around and so on. And I felt really sorry for Miller. He was in tears at the end. I think he felt like, obviously he was probably 1 foot away from pulling off what would have been a sensational victory for South Africa. And you mentioned this before. He was facing Hardik Pandya. It was a low full toss. he smoked it. Maybe he wasn't one of the Klaasen ones that was sort of landing on the solar panels on the roof of the grandstand, but geez, he got a lot of it. And I thought when Pandya was bowling that last those in those final overs, he's there for the taking. This guy, he's not going to be able to step up to it. But credit to him, he did.
He did.
Yeah. The other sensational piece of cricket I just wanted to touch on this before we go was that run out. Well, first of all, Akshar Patel, how good is a floating number 8 who comes up and just looks sensational? 47 off 31, resurrected the Indian innings. But the run out, him being run out by Quinton de Kock from the wicket keeper's end, he was at the non-striker's end, was one of the greatest pieces of cricket. Absolutely superb presence of mind from Quinton de Kock. Has he retired? Is he retiring as well? I feel like it's the last hurrah for him as well.
I kind of felt like this, if he is retiring, it kind of feels like this is about his 3rd or 4th retirement. It feels like he's stepped aside from a lot of things, but then I remembered that one of them was actually just refusing to play after refusing to kneel at the World T20 in the UAE. So I think I mistook that for a retirement, because I was half surprised to see him there at the start of the tournament. Actually, so haven't you given the international game away? But yeah, it was a sensational piece of cricket by de Kock and a slightly lazy piece of cricket from the otherwise brilliant Akshar Patel.
I think he was just tired, DC. He doesn't normally bat for 31 deliveries. He certainly doesn't normally get 47. Geez, he's a very handy player. Yeah. Hey, we should take a wee break, and when we come back, let's have a quick yarn about what this whole messy, interesting, fascinating, intriguing T20 World Cup means for cricket. Welcome back to the BYC with Dylan Cleaver and Paul Ford. We are going over the entrails of the Cricket World Cup. We're hardly even really talking about the Black Caps, to be honest. But Dylan, when you reflect on this T20 World Cup, that's a pretty lofty question, but what do you think it all means? What's its legacy? Did it do what it was meant to do? What kind of things stick in your mind?
Partially. It just felt a little bit messy. Partly that was weather, partly that was underprepared venues, partly it is format. I don't know if the group to Super 8 to semis to final works. It just feels like it could be cleaner. I know that you get less content if you go straight into the knockouts from group play, and I mean content is king, right? But I thought it mostly did its job really, and you've said here we've learned how to use the word diaspora. Well, I've actually learned how to say it, because I kept on. I would always call it diaspora, I think, but I went and had a online tutorial, and
nice.
The emphasis is on the S. It's on the second syllable, so it's diaspora is how you say it.
It did get a real workout during this tournament, didn't it? Because everyone was kind of like, well, Americans aren't going to watch it, and then everyone's like, well, no, but the diaspora will watch it. And, so that was definitely one, but it felt a bit Mickey Mouse. I mean, I mentioned the travel thing before, and I know there were probably good reasons for some of this, but it did feel like things are slightly tilted in favor of A, risk in terms of that New York ground, B, just things just making it a bit easier for India. It did feel like it wasn't quite an even playing field, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, and the Mickey Mouse reference works well in Mickey Mouse's second home, which of course is Florida, where they had 4 matches scheduled, and unfortunately they got just one of them in, and that was a real blow, I think, for the organisers. I think the shocking state of the pitch in New York was clearly a blow, but they still got cricket there at least, and they still got some actually quite exciting games. Not the kind of games you would expect at a T20 batting extravaganza, but they were still games of cricket that came down to the wire in some cases. But Trinidad was inexcusable. You got one of the great venues of the world there in Queen's Park Oval, and yet we play on this brand new venue. Well, it might not be brand new, but it's new enough, and it was poor cricket. There's no other word to describe it. I didn't think the cricketing in Guyana was great, but it was serviceable. And I think one of the bonuses for the organisers was the US playing pretty well. You know, they were outclassed once they got to that Super 8 stage, but there was joy unconfined with the way they went through the group stage. That was fantastic. Adam Jones belting untold sixes and Texan Heartland. It was great. So I would say, what would I give it? I'd probably give it a flat B. Virgin.
That's like a sort of a 7 out of 10. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, probably 6.5, 7 out of 10. I don't give half marks, so I'd have to go for 7 out of 10. What about yourself?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you touched on a couple of things that when I reflect on this tournament, it's that T20 is a monster, and I know it's a cliche, but 20 overs just brings teams into it that would not be able to survive in battle in a full-blown duel over 50 overs, let alone Test cricket. Well, I don't think they would anyway, and I think we saw that with the United States of America. I think probably their players are a little bit distracted by the fact that they're having to answer their emails as they went into the Super 8s because they ran out of annual leave, and so they were just having to sort of work around the clock on both fronts. But that rise of the second tier, great. Always great when the host nation does well. So I'm really on board with what happened there, although it was probably, not great for Pakistan, obviously, or New Zealand. And, it's hard to go past Afghanistan. We touched on this last week. There was also some comments this week about how their travel arrangements to get from the end of the Super 8s into their semi-final, they were back at the hotel at 3 a.m. and then they were travelling to the next venue at 8 a.m. and playing the day after that. That's pretty tough. And as I say, feels like some of the bigger teams, one in particular, had a much more of an armchair ride on that front. The other interesting thing, just as an aside, I saw just before we came on air that there's been an entreaty from the Afghanistan women's team, who are unofficial. They have asked that the ICC assist them in setting up a refugee team based in Australia in the absence of a national side. Of course, women unable to play because of the Taliban's horrific regulations. So an interesting little conundrum there for ICC chair and all-round good bugger Greg Barclay to assess. It's a pretty tangled web that's being woven there, I'd suggest, for the ICC to wade into.
Well, perhaps it's a chance for him to get back on the front foot after this issue, because he is a terrific bloke and he does a great job. But the one perhaps misstep in his role was when he described the Taliban's grip on the women's game there as a blip. I think he described it. He immediately regretted it, and it was clearly not the context he meant it in. But he was hauled over the coals by. I guess
Amnesty International.
Well, yeah, mainly Twitter, and
I think he meant vice-like grip, not blip. But close. I mean, the other thing that caught my eye is really, there was a mix. I guess you've seen it with India, and in the Indian case, experienced players are kind of their rock stars, and were probably the reason that they did so well. In other cases, teams rolled the dice, took a bunch of experienced players, and came up short. England made the semi-finals, probably. On reflection, a pretty bloody good effort. Australia, of course, not making it through. New Zealand, obviously not making it through. It does feel like there is a real changing of the guard that's happening amongst international cricket. And to make that point, it's pretty extraordinary. I heard Gideon Haigh say how Sachin Tendulkar played one T20 international, and Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma have played 200 or whatever it is. And I had a quick look from a New Zealand perspective. It's just remarkable to think about this. Chris Cairns played 2 T20 internationals and scored 3 runs. Nathan Astle played 4. Stephen Fleming played 5, and Craig McMillan played 8. Tim Southey, 126 not out. Guptill, 122. Ish Sodhi, 117 not out. Mitchell Santner, 104 not out. Generational shift in how the game is played.
Yeah, and I know the Chris Cairns one in particular. I mean, if there was a format he was born for, it was probably T20, right? So.
Yes, wearing David Miller's T-shirt in the V in the tree, I'd suggest.
Mind you, if you go back a couple of generations before that, you can do the same exercise with the advent of one-day cricket when it came in sort of the late 70s, early 80s, and you look back at some of the New Zealand players. I mean, Ken Wadsworth, who obviously passed away far too young, but he was one that was identified as someone who would have been a terrific one-day player. Never got the chance.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And and then the other thing, we just touched on this before, but I did have a quick look, and the T20 Cricket World Cup in Sri Lanka and India is February and March 2026, so just shy of 2 years away. The 20 teams will be divided into 4 groups of 5. The top 2 teams in each group will advance to the Super 8. So brace yourself. India and Sri Lanka, who are pretty lucky, qualify as hosts. Australia, England, South Africa, West Indies, USA, Bangladesh and Afghanistan are in because they made the Super 8s. And then the 3 least worst in the rankings after that lot. So New Zealand are through, as are Pakistan and Ireland. And there's 8 spots to be decided via the regional qualifiers. I think you mentioned this before. India, no Jadeja, no Kohli, no Sharma. New Zealand, obviously no Bolt, and probably a host of others. And there's lots of speculation that Australia won't have the likes of, well, Warner's gone, but also Maxwell, Wade, Stark, those kind of guys, very likely to be not on the scrap heap, but sort of easing their way out of T20 international cricket, possibly against their will. DC, let's park it there. If you didn't have anything more to throw at the wall on that particular topic, and when we come back, we'll wince and have a look at the White Ferns. Welcome back to the BYC podcast. It's Paul Ford and Dylan Cleaver coming to you from the Export Beer Garden studio. DC, the White Ferns, a pretty tough start to their tour of England. A couple of drubbings. It's fair to say.
Yeah. Look, losing to England's not surprising, but jeepers, what a mess! Just awful. I'll just quickly run through the short score cards because it won't take long. In the first game at Chester Street, New Zealand batted first, posted 156. England in reply 157 for 1 in just 21.2 overs. Moving down the road to Worcester for game 2, New Zealand again batting first, posting 141. England in reply 142 for 2 in just 24.3 overs. Yep, you heard that right. The White Ferns have scored sub 160 in both games, have taken a sum total of 3 England wickets, and one of them was a run out. Look, there's losing to England, and I think everybody that's listened to the BYC, anyone that follows cricket with any kind of close lens on the game, on all formats of the game, will recognise that New Zealand has slipped a long way behind Australia, England, probably India now, but there's losing, and then there's absolutely not showing up on what is, a pretty high-profile tour for them.
Yes, I think I saw it's 17 years, I think. We're talking about the Indian drought. 17 years since New Zealand beat England in a women's ODI series. And as you say, doesn't feel like, well, this series is gone already, but hard to think of one that would be more lopsided than that. It does feel like we're playing 50-over cricket from the 80s and England are playing IPL T20 cricket. Really, really tough going. Couple of quotes. Sophie Devine, New Zealand captain, first game, really disappointed. And game 2, similar trends. We didn't bat our overs. That's a crime. 140, you're not going to be competitive. Fair play. I think that's pretty much bang on.
Yeah, look, I just don't think things are right there. I think that it's a miss in terms of, I don't want to go so far to say culturally, because unless you're in the camp, you don't know what the culture of a team is like. So I think we can look outside and go, well, there's something not right there. But very clearly, my understanding was that Jason Wells wanted to continue in his role as selector. He was effectively told no and didn't have his contract renewed, that they were going to look in a different direction there. Now, look, I'm joining dots here. I'm adding 2 and 2 and maybe getting 7.5. But Wells is very tight with Robbie Kerr. They played together at Wellington. Is that a shot across the bows of the power structure within that team, maybe? Is it sending a message? I don't know. I don't have answers to these. I'm not close enough connected, but it feels like there's something very wrong at the state of women's cricket. This team is not getting better. We thought that when we hosted the World Cup, that was a low point, right? The Bob Carter regime fizzled out badly. Getting a more dynamic Australian coach that had great success as an assistant with the Australian women's team was a good step in the right direction. perhaps nurture some of this younger talent coming through. But I do think you've got to ask it, do we have young talent coming through? We're still heavily reliant on Sophie Devine and Susie Bates, who are moving into their mid-30s, not setting the world on fire on this tour, very obviously, but then again, no one is. And I watched the way England and Australia play the game now and India play the game now, and the game is moving more. I don't mean this in a patronising way at all, but I guess the skill sets of the game are moving closer to perhaps the men's game. A lot of power hitting in front of the wicket that simply wasn't there in the past in the women's game. I'm not seeing that translate to New Zealand performance. Some very good players. Millie Kerr is a very good player. Sophie Devine is a player who can power hit in front of the wicket. Very good player. But that second tier of players coming through, it just doesn't seem to be there. And look, I don't know where they go. I don't know if you've had any deep thoughts on it, but these are terrible, terrible results. We can't get away from that. And I think we've said this over the past couple of years. New Zealand cricket have to make some calls here. Are they going to invest heavily in the women's game? If so, how are they going to do it? You can't just throw money at something and expect it to be better. You've got to throw money at it in terms of resource. And where do you put that resource? Does New Zealand, because it's got a small talent pool, perhaps load up on their T20 and make that the game that the format they're going to pursue? And I mean, I don't know. Over to you, Paul. Any thoughts?
No, I think you do know, Dylan. I think there's some very savvy observations there, and I think we've been a broken record about that reliance on the same. I was going to say half a dozen, but really it's 3 or 4 players, and it's the next tier and then the tier below that, and then, as you say, the youngsters coming through, and lots of them have been given chances. Have they been given chances too early? Is this a part of a 5-year plan? Is 5 years too long? How's the plan going? I don't like the look of it. It makes me feel nervous. Look, I'm not sure, but I guess what I do know is, or who I do know is, Jason Wells is an absolute top man, and I'm just not sure that we'll be better without someone like that involved. So that's news to me. So an interesting one. I will keep an eye out for him at the Island Bay Football Club rooms over the next few weeks and see what we can glean from him.
I mean, some players in that team, and I don't want to pick on individuals because they don't get the same backing as the men. They don't get the same money in that. But there's some players in that team that are getting lots and lots and lots of chances and doing next to nothing with them. So do you cut them and move on to the next? I mean, I don't know. It just feels like a hot mess at the moment.
One thing that isn't a hot mess is the correspondence to the BYC. Thank you to everyone that's got in touch. We've got a couple to whip through here, DC. First one is from UK Paul, and it's on the Test captaincy. Hello, fellas. Love listening to your podcast from over here in the UK. Always makes me laugh. Keep up the great work. A question I would be interested to hear you discuss is, who do you think should be the Black Caps Test captain for the upcoming Red Ball Tour? At the conclusion of the Test versus Australia, there was a lot of question marks on whether Tim Southee would remain as skipper. While I have no issues with Tim as captain as such, the big question really would be, is he a definite pick for selection in the upcoming Red Ball games away against Afghanistan, Sri Lanka and India, given the spin-friendly nature of these wickets? If his place in the team isn't guaranteed, surely he can't be captain. The easy answer might be Tom Latham, though I wonder if it's an opportunity to look to the future a bit with a Daryl Mitchell or a Glenn Phillips or Devon Conway. What do you reckon?
Well, it's a good question. There's a couple of things I would like to say on that. First of all, Mitchell's 33, Conway turns 33 on Monday. So is that really looking to the future if they're your next in line? Glenn Phillips would be a very bold move, but I think bless him, but I think he operates on a slightly different wavelength to most sentient human beings. So it might be a risk too far, but it's a good idea. But what I would say is Tim Southee is going to be captain. for those games. And you look at his record, his career, he's taken 380 test wickets at an average of 29.61 at a strike rate of 59.5. This will surprise a lot of people. In Sri Lanka, he's taken 64 wickets at an average of 18 with a strike rate of 45.3, so miles better than his overall record. In India, he's taken 52 wickets at an average of 24.69 at a strike rate of 46.9, miles better than his overall record. I think people do tend to forget he is a very, very canny, clever bowler in subcontinent conditions, but we cannot overlook the fact that he was poor last summer. So I'm guessing his rope is shorter, but he's not at the end of it yet.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. And I had the same set of stats, and I was actually really surprised that his stats in India in particular were better than his overall career stats. And look, I think it seems like he's an absolute lock. Tom Latham is potentially a contender if Southee decides he needs a rest or whatever, but I feel like it would be Southee making that call, and I just can't see it happening. He's notoriously fit, and notoriously hates not playing too. I think we've seen that in particular at the SCG comes to mind. He's probably far too grumpy to be 12th man when he's put in that position. So look, love the speculation, love the discussion, but I'm with you on that.
And I mean, he does need an uptick in form. He can't continue playing like he did the last home summer. At his age, you are starting to wonder if he's fallen off a cliff in terms of his performance, but we're not there yet. Hey, look, here's another question. Great piece of correspondence, which I will rush through. As DCF on the future of T20 Black Caps. Hi all, I've enjoyed the discussions you've had in the last few episodes about what changes you'd like to see the Black Caps T20 approach going forward, and which players will or won't be making the trip to the subcontinent in 2026. However, as a Kiwi living overseas, specifically the USA, a country desperately trying to convince itself that watching a 1-0 baseball game is a good way to spend 3 hours, and one that thinks silly mid-on is a ridiculous name for a position but tight end and shortstop aren't, my knowledge of the next generation of Black Cap stars could best be described as bugger all. I probably couldn't pick Eddie Ashok or Will O'Rourke out of a lineup if my life depended on it. So to that end, I was wondering if you could add a third discussion to your future Black Caps T20 lineup series. For the benefit of us Kiwis, you don't get to see a lot of Super Smash 4 Trophy or Plunket Shield cricket. Who would you rate as the up-and-comers who best fit the profiles of cricketers you'd like to see in the Black Caps T20 squad in years coming? He has a few qualifiers there, like potential power-hitting top-order batter. But who would we like to see in the mix over the next few years as the likes of Michael Bracewell, Trent Bolt, Lockie Ferguson and others are phased out? Cheers all, and if I run into any Kiwis at the Major League Cricket matches in North Carolina next month, I'll shout them a pint or whip up a homemade mince and cheese.
Nice. Great. How good. Oh, it makes me want to travel over there just for that mince and cheese. I mean, we're going to talk about this, I imagine, for literally years to come, but and we have talked about a few guys that are in the mix. What I did, I had a quick look at sort of the highest strike rates in the Super Smash just to get a flavour, because I feel like you sort of have a vibe of guys that you've seen play. Just went and had a look at some raw numbers. Now, the highest strike rate from a batting point of view is Doug Bracewell, which is a bit wacky. But, there it is. A 93 not out will do that. So fair play to him. There's a really interesting guy by the name of Bevan John Jacobs from Gauteng who plays for Canterbury. He's been a revelation in Canterbury club cricket, and he did some really, really good things in the Super Smash, and he's in that another Safa that's cutting his way in through the New Zealand scene. I think he's definitely one to watch. I mean, Tim Robinson's an obvious one. Finn Allen's going to be there. I like Max Chew's done some good things. He's sort of
is he that young?
Possibly not that young. I think I always talk about him because his auntie is my next door neighbour. But and Mitch Hay's another one that I think's worth a crack, and a guy that I know is not young, but I'm not saying he's David Miller, but a touch of David Miller as well. O'Donnell, I think he could have done some good things, and I think Nathan Smith's going to be a really obvious one that's about to break through. So I think those are some contenders from a batting point of view.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I had a look as well. I probably perused some of the same stats as you and Robinson, Mitch Hay, Dean Foxcroft. Those three are actually over in India at the moment, learning to sweep on spinning wickets. So that might be a pointer to where the selectors think the future lies. In fact, I'd go so far to say it's a huge pointer. Dean Foxcroft is flattered to deceive a little in the T20 game, actually, but he's certainly got talent. I love the way he bats when he's in, but his strike rate is pretty. I didn't think he had an amazing season last season. Muabas is another one who has got talent dripping out of his pores. Maybe T20's not quite his game yet, but it will be. I always wonder why Nick Kelly hasn't ever had a crack. But I mean, he's about to turn 31, but he always plays well for Wellington. And on the bowling front, Ben Lister is still 28.
Rest in peace, Jason Hoyt, who's sick this week, by the way. Yeah. He's actually not dead. Well, I don't think he is.
But Ben Lister's 28. He's got last season, I think his economy was just a tick over 6, and his strike rate was 13. Like, he was the pick of the seamers. Eddie Ashok, unfortunately, I didn't realize this actually, but he had back surgery, really serious back surgery. He's actually got I think he might have even had a screw inserted, which sounds very Shane Bond type of surgery. So I guess we wait with bated breath to see if he has to reconfigure his action or anything like that. But obviously he's got a huge potential as a leg spinner. And another guy who's done nothing yet to justify this lofty place on the BYC, but just keep half an eye out for Jock McKenzie. He was he was in the Blues, I think, Super Rugby squad, and he was a 2-sport star at high school. He is now throwing his lot in with cricket. He looked last summer, the times I watched him, I thought he's possibly not quite there yet with either discipline, but there's clearly potential there, and I think he might be a kind of a Clarkson, but maybe with a little bit more upside than a Clarkson for the long term, because he's very young. I think he might be 22.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, Nathan Smith again for me, just to chuck in a couple of guys that kind of haven't come through in the bowling. And I know he's there. He's been in the squad. He's played already. But Zach Folkes, I think, is going to be a real gun coming through, and definitely a terrific player to watch. He can bat too. So yeah, there's a few names there that we're throwing around so that we can claim them down the track. Hopefully that's helpful, DCF, but definitely a topic, the future T20 Black Caps team that we'll be wrestling with over the next couple of years ahead of that T20 World Cup. Third one, just quickly, is Muzza on Devlin. Did you guys see Martin Devlin's rant on the larger number of folks employed by New Zealand cricket? I suspect Gary Stead is carrying the can for poor planning, maybe player empowerment gone astray. Jared Kimber on his pod made the point that countries like New Zealand and Sri Lanka, with our lesser numbers, are going to have good and bad periods. New Zealand's at the end of a great period, and it seems that there's not too much in the way of talent coming through, at least not the kind of talent that we've been used to over the past 10 or 15 years. What are your thoughts, boys?
Yeah, look, I didn't see the rant, but I think by most standards, New Zealand runs a fairly lean operation. So I wouldn't have thought that New Zealand is getting clogged up by bureaucracy at head office or in the high performance system down in Lincoln. That's not to say I don't think there shouldn't be changes in that high performance system, and there shouldn't be fresh blood, perhaps, but I don't think too many people is the problem there. I think Jerry Kidman is dead right. New Zealand's fortunes are going to be cyclical. You try and smooth out that roller coaster as best you can with good succession planning. Has New Zealand got that right at the moment? Well, clearly not, if they're going to a tournament with essentially the entire team bar maybe Finn Allen over 30, and it's up to the BYC to discuss who that next wave of talent coming through is, because it's not obvious to other people. So, perhaps they haven't got it right, and perhaps we are on the brink of a prolonged slump. I hope not. And but we are. I mean, Jared's right. We're never going to have a factory line of talent like India can that pours out of the Ranji Trophy and the IPL and that sort of thing. It's just never going to be part of the New Zealand game. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that, Mus.
Yeah, and I agree with you, DC, and I think as we've touched on before, it's been and as he does himself in his email, it's been an incredible run from a playing point of view. But I also think, we talk about New Zealand punching above its weight, and now the expectations are higher, and that's why we get pissed off when we lose to teams like Afghanistan. But also, I think it's fair to say that the way that cricket has been run in New Zealand also punches above its weight. I know it's had its controversies from time to time, but none of these huge kind of massive things have happened over the last few years, and I think it's a pretty neat and tidy shop generally. And I think lots of things have obviously worked pretty damn well over the last 10 years or so, for sure. So yeah, I think I'm not sure we should be talking about Martin Devlin, because I think that's probably exactly what he wants. Hey,
I mean, it was a bad campaign. It was a poor campaign in the Caribbean for this World T20. There are reasons that we've discussed on previous podcasts for it, namely poor preparation and maybe coming to the end of a cycle. I don't know if it's deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's time for a little bit of Paul Ford's Violence Corner.
Paul Ford's Cricket Violence Corner.
Pakistani cricketer Umar Akmal has been arrested for allegedly thrashing a traffic warden, and he was taken to the police station and charged under sections 186, 279 and 353 of the Pakistan Penal Code for obstructing an official at work, tearing a police uniform and misbehaving and hurling threats. The traffic warden stopped Akmal after he was stopped for violating a traffic light signal. He counter-alleged that the warden had abused and slapped him. The place where the incident took place has CCTV cameras all around, and I would ask the authorities to look at the footage and then decide whether I have done anything wrong, Umar said. Sounds like quite a good defence, to be fair.
I'll tell you what, though, you don't want to get on the wrong side of 276 on the Pakistani Penal Code, that's for sure. Umar Akmal, what a curious cricketer he was. I remember he came out to New Zealand when he was really young, brother of Cameron Akmal, the keeper with iron gloves. But he scored a fantastic Test century, and I think I might have been working with Shane Bond on his biography at the time, and I remember him just saying that kid is a gun. He could be anything, and he really didn't amount to much at all.
No, it's always a bad day when you're in the paper for tearing a police uniform, I would suggest. Hey, Dylan Cleaver, I think that's us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on this week's BYC podcast. You could fill your week watching the White Ferns play in the dead of the night in England, live streamed via the ICC website from midnight tonight. And then you can watch the T20s from 1:30 a.m. on Sunday. Maybe. And in the meantime, if you've got anything to get off your chest, send us a short diatribe to byc@beigebrigade.co.nz. Take care out there. Ka kite, kia kaha.